Broadcasting live from the Subaru of Gwinnett studio inside the Sonesta Gwinnett Place Atlanta Hotel. It's time for Travel Safely with Brian Mulligan. Travel Safely is presented by Applied Information, creator of the Travel Safely smartphone app.
Welcome, everyone, to Travel Safely, the business talk show bringing you the latest in innovation from transportation, technology, and entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Brian Mulligan, coming to you from the Subaru Business Radio X studio in Gwinnett County in Georgia. This show is sponsored by Applied Information, a technology company here in Gwinnett, focused on using technology to save lives and improve traffic. Our guest today is AJ Piplica, founder and chief executive at Hermeus, a Atlanta aerospace company of all things, developing a Mach 5 aircraft with the goal of massively reducing flight times and increasing safety for long-haul business class air travel. Fascinating. Welcome, AJ.
Thank you, Luke. Thanks.
Our topic of the day is radical change in the world of air travel. Atlanta is known all over the world for being a leader in commercial air travel with Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. But really, could Atlanta become the center of supersonic air travel? Let's find out more. AJ, so before we get into the details of aerospace, and I've been an aeronautics guy, enthusiast all my life, so I'm fascinated to talk about this. But talk to us about the AJ Piplica story. How did you come to be in Georgia and, of all things, develop an aerospace company here?
Well, it all starts with Star Trek and Star Wars back in the day.
Oh, wow.
So I grew up in Florida. I was born in New York, but grew up in Florida. Went to Georgia Tech for undergrad and did my master's there as well, both in aerospace engineering. When I went in, I didn't really know kind of what to expect in terms of where that would take my career and life in the future. But I think I can kind of go back to the first air show I ever went to is at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. And there was a C-5 Galaxy, so it's one of the largest cargo aircraft that we have. And to see something, the size of a building lay on its side and take off and go fly, that just boggled my mind. It's like something that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, it's impossible, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to go make things like that. So that's what kind of drove me to Georgia Tech in aerospace. And, I learned through not just my academic work, but also through internships and co-op experiences at NASA, down at Johnson Space Center in Houston, what it meant to be an aerospace engineer. It's there's so much more to the game than tube and wing aircraft. Everything from spacecraft and satellites to rockets and now hypersonic aircraft. So after university, I started working at a local aerospace company called SpaceWorks. Started doing conceptual design for all sorts of aerospace systems, but focused on reusable launch vehicles and high-speed aircraft. So I kind of learned my way through how you, from the back of a napkin, put some numbers behind designing an aircraft that flies 5 times the speed of sound. From there, I kind of branched into the entrepreneurial part of my background. So within SpaceWorks, we started a subsidiary company called Generation Orbit, and that company was started to build small rockets to launch small satellites to orbit. So these are satellites you can hold in your hand.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. So we took that company. We had never built anything before, so the first thing we wanted to do was build a rocket and show that we can do it. And the mission for that rocket ended up being not going to orbit, but flying really fast in the atmosphere. So it was kind of like a flying wind tunnel, if you think about it. Right. So that kind of brought together aviation and space in a way that I hadn't really thought about, when I was in school. But that's really, I think, where the origin of Hermeus comes from. Is kind of the bringing together of this commercial space way of doing business that we've seen through Blue Origin and SpaceX and companies like that, and applying it to the aviation part of the industry that's for the better part of the past 50, 60 years, we haven't gone much faster. Now we've done a lot to kind of improve the efficiency and safety of air travel, but speed hasn't changed. It's actually gone backwards a little bit.
Correct. I mean, that's fascinating because it's just, the couple of things that stand out for me. One is I've lived in Atlanta for 23 years, and I had no idea there was an aerospace industry here. And so, I mean, did you guys just operate under the radar? Or, I mean, how does the entrepreneurship and aerospace industry work in Atlanta? Is it based around Dobbins or based around...
No, I wouldn't say it's necessarily based kind of geographically, but I would say that it has grown out of Georgia Tech in a large way. So SpaceWorks was founded by a professor from Georgia Tech, John Olds. So he built that company, coming out of Georgia Tech and their space systems design lab. And we have a lot of aerospace in not just the city of Atlanta, but the state of Georgia. I mean, we have Delta headquartered here, we have UPS headquartered here, Gulfstream down in Savannah, Lockheed Martin. Aerospace is, I think, the third or fourth largest export of the state, and most people don't necessarily realize
that's
that.
A good point.
Yeah.
Are you able to attract the right kind of talent here to Atlanta? I mean,
that's a great question. We get it all the time. Atlanta's a pretty unique place to be working on these types of things. You've already hit on a number of the pieces that make Atlanta kind of a transportation hub. We have the busiest airport in the world, Delta, UPS, Gulfstream.
Yeah.
The second best aerospace school in the country in Georgia Tech. But I think there's a lot of people who want to work on these types of problems, but don't necessarily want to live in the typical hotbeds of Los Angeles or Silicon Valley or even the Northeast. So having a place in the Southeast that is unique, and where we are unique, there's not a whole lot of companies like us here. That gives us a competitive advantage. Also, labor costs are quite a bit less than the Bay Area.
Correct. I mean, that's a great incentive. I mean, that's why we're in Atlanta as well. Is that you can get great people at a reasonable price, and you can access a great airport where you can fly anywhere more or less with single leg. And if you locate yourself down in Savannah or something like that, then it becomes more difficult to travel. But given that typically the way venture funding works is that they look at an existing business and then you come up with a business plan that's just a little incremental step from where everybody is. Now, building an airplane that flies 5 times the speed of sound, that's not an incremental step from where we are. How do you set about attracting funding, with what might be considered a long shot business?
Sure. I think you kind of have to look for the right people. There are plenty of visionaries out there who, their mission as a venture capitalist is, not necessarily, obviously it's, to provide a return, otherwise they wouldn't be in business, but, broader than that. And generally you'll find it in the more successful ones, some of the bigger firms. But, they have an opportunity to take bets on things that are kind of high risk, but very high payoff in terms of the effect that they can, the positive effect they can have on society. So, the pool of venture capitalists that are able to do that and interested in doing that is obviously smaller than the whole. But those are the kinds of people that we're interested in working in.
And sort of what sort of time frame are they looking at for some kind of?
It depends.
A decade.
Yeah. I mean that's kind of the pretty long term side of venture. 8 to 10 years. But given what we're doing, it's not going to be 10 years before the company has revenue. There's a pretty good incremental path along the way as we're kind of building. We're starting small, building small vehicles, and then kind of growing them in terms of scale and capability. And that'll allow us to access a couple of ancillary markets along the way and grow the company's revenues along with the funding that we're raising.
Right, because it's actually quite a good day to be talking about this and commercial space flight intersected with air travel because obviously SpaceX launched their Falcon Heavy and landed 2 out of their 3 cores, and I love the
core stage is tricky.
I mean, it was traveling at 4 times the speed of a rifle bullet. And I love the term of an RUD is rapid unexpected disassembly or something like that, called a big crash. But nonetheless, they've pioneered the way for private sector to tackle these things that up until now people only really seen could be done with government funding.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of a core philosophy behind the way that commercial space companies like Blue Origin and SpaceX, I kind of poke on them because they're the kind of the big boys, but the approach that they took to developing complex systems was not so much about kind of working design and analysis and back and forth for years and years and years. It was to kind of get a good feel for what you wanted to build and then go build it. Because it's when you kind of build integrated systems, you put hardware and software together, you find all the problems you didn't think you would have or you didn't know about, and you're able to iterate. I mean, SpaceX specifically, I think, has demonstrated this better than anybody.
Yeah.
They used every single paying customer flight as a test flight, and that's how they got to reusability. Without having to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for their own test campaigns, they were just clever about the way that they did it. And
yeah, they certainly did a great job with that, and even Tesla, which is another, obviously Elon Musk's success story. I was at a symposium last week where the guy stood up in the stage and he said, the biggest thing about Tesla is they use their 100,000 cars as a test fleet without your permission. So everybody should be offended by what they do. And I'm going, high five, man. I mean, what a business model to be able to get all that data and use it to improve your product.
Yeah, I mean, with all the Teslas on the road today, they're gathering massive amounts of data with every single one, and that's what's enabling them to bring autonomous cars into everyday life.
Into mainstream. After the break, we'll drill down deeper into the nuts and bolts that is there are in your supersonic jets, being developed by AJ and his team at Hermeus. But first, 30 seconds with Sarah.
This is your 30 seconds or less with Sarah. A recent study by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety calls for more driver training, after finding that most drivers don't really understand what semi-autonomous driving systems do. The study looked at Tesla's autopilot versus competitor products like Traffic Jam Assist in Audis and Acuras, BMW's Driving Assist Plus, and Nissan's ProPilot Assist. Nearly half of the 2,000 people surveyed said it would be safe to take their hands off the wheel using an autopilot, while only 30% thought it would be safe in a competitor's. 6% thought it would be just fine to take a nap. Tesla argues that the study was of the general population, and Tesla drivers presumably have access to in-car and manual instructions. However, the study does highlight the big gap between what the public assumes these systems do and what is, in fact, safe operation of the vehicle. Back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Sarah. In case you're just joining us, this is Travel Safely with Brian Mulligan, how to save lives and improve traffic, with our guest, AJ Piplica, co-founder and CEO of Hermeus, an Atlanta-based company developing a supersonic business jet. Tell us specifically about the business jets. How do you go from a Concorde, which was a great technical success all those years ago, and then ended up commercially struggling? How do you go from there to a business class supersonic jet? How fast will it fly? How high? And so forth.
Sure. So yeah, Concorde is a really interesting story. It was developed by two governments. The company that we know today as Airbus came out of that development program, and that drove a lot of the way that kind of its cost structure was built up. So, but I mean, it operated successfully for 25 years or so, and was one of the safest aircraft in the skies. There's a lot of technology that's kind of improved since the Concorde days. We kind of place our interest in three core areas. One is artificial intelligence, so driving the massive amounts of data that we'll be gathering and all of the testing on the ground, in simulation and in flight that we'll be doing, into fully autonomous systems down the road. Obviously, there are laws that we have to deal with, but that's kind of a core competency that we'll be building into the...
So the whole basis of this would actually be an autonomous hypersonic jet.
We'll see. So when we get to flying people, there'll be pilots on it to start.
There'll be pilots, but the idea is...
The framework will be there, the experience base will be there to make a transition down the road, because when you're flying at Mach 5, the amount of time you have to make a decision is very, very small.
Yeah, and so in fact, again, like this transition to autonomous driving, the pilots will be supervising systems. I mean, fly-by-wire is already well known in the aircraft industry, so it's not like it's going to be new. But in other words, the first-line reaction to disturbances and things will be done by computers. Is that what we're saying? With the pilot supervising those systems?
Yep. And eventually we'll kind of progress into different levels of autonomy and decision making, but that's for the future.
How about engines and types of fuel and stuff? Is these scramjets or they
close? So on the propulsion side, we will be using a ramjet for the high-speed portion of flight. So that's kind of like a scramjet, but the combustion stays subsonic. So when the air is going through the combustor, it stays below the speed of sound. So we slow it down pretty substantially. And that's the kind of difference between the two. Problem with the ramjet is you can't generate thrust when you're not moving. You have to get up to supersonic speeds for to start generating shock waves, compressing the air and burning it. So we'll be using a turbojet for the low-speed portion of flight. So pretty similar to the way that commercial aircraft are powered today. And then some little magic sauce to bridge the gap between the two.
And the ramjet, we're talking about the thing with the sort of the doodle bug from World War II with the with the little flaps at the front that open and close, or is this just all done with dynamic air pressure variation and things
Yeah,
like
so there's going to be a reasonable amount of moving parts in the engine, mostly in the ducting, so the inlet and the nozzle. But the ramjet itself doesn't have any moving parts.
Okay. Wow. What about the noise?
What about the noise?
So
Indeed.
how do you deal with sonic booms and
Sure.
and supersonic travel over land?
Yep. So, given the way that the kind of current legislations are, which in the United States say that you cannot fly commercially faster than Mach 1 over land, regardless of whether or not you make a sonic boom on the ground, we've based the business case completely on over water routes. So this is crossing oceans. Now, if the laws change, which I think there's being quite a bit of progress going on right now in improving those laws, becoming kind of performance-based, we can't bank on that. So we banked our business case on the way the laws are written today, which means flying over water. So routes similar to what Concorde flew, although a bit broader. So, crossing the Atlantic Ocean is, probably the most popular route, but also crossing the Pacific. And then there's also a number of north-south routes that are pretty interesting, both in Asia, North and South America, Europe, Africa.
So you're talking about long distance
Yes.
hypersonic.
Well, that's where it makes sense, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So, you're going to spend, 10, 20 minutes accelerating up to Mach 5 and decelerating back down. So in order for it to make sense, you kind of have to apply it to long distances. Like, you wouldn't necessarily fly from Atlanta to Savannah. You'd probably drive a car in that case because of all the time it takes to go to the airport and so forth. So, yeah, this is really for longer distance travel.
So the $64,000 question is, where are you in development? Is this still at the back of a napkin stage, or are you ready to start flying stuff? Building hardware? Where are you in that paradigm?
I'd say definitely in between back of a napkin and flying things. So this year we're working, our main technical objective is to build the first prototype of our engine. So that'll function from wheels stop on the ground all the way up to Mach 5. And we'll be testing that in a wind tunnel on the ground. So,
are there wind tunnels here in Atlanta that support Mach 5?
No, we'll be going up to Indiana.
Okay.
Actually, there's some university tunnels up in Indiana that have facilities that kind of meet our needs. So that's the main goal for this year. And then over the kind of following 2.5 years or so, our goal will be to get that engine into an airframe and then up into the air. And then demonstrate that we can take off from the ground, touch Mach 5, come back and land, and do that over and over and over again with tons of instrumentation. There's so much we have to learn.
And is this going to be a carbon fiber airframe, or
no? It'll be primarily metallic. So the kind of third leg of the stool, if you will, on the technology front for us. So artificial intelligence and then propulsion. The final one is high temperature structures. So the titanium alloys that we have today, commercially available, are pretty good up at the temperatures that we'll be seeing in most of the airframe for cruising at Mach 5. Certain parts of the airframe will be composite. Potentially, so the leading edges of the wings and the nose where it gets really, really hot. But the vast majority of the structure will be titanium.
So, in fact, you can actually accomplish this with today's materials.
Exactly.
That's pretty interesting. And then that's actually going back to the SpaceX model, is one of the things that they actually pioneered is the idea of using commercial computers, in industrial technologies to the greatest extent possible.
Yeah, exactly. There's not a whole lot of kind of little components that need to be invented. They just need to be put together in an efficient system and in hardware and shown.
So where? I mean, I'd love to come and see this thing fly. Where are you going to fly it? Is that an Atlanta thing, or are you going to get out into the middle of the desert somewhere?
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't think we'll be flight testing too much here in Atlanta. We might do some in Florida, but most likely we'll be out in California, either at Edwards Air Force Base, potentially in New Mexico, from Spaceport America. So there are some pretty good flight test ranges available to us.
So do you think the future holds for supersonic flight and space travel in the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, is this all going to be for real, do you think?
Absolutely.
How many companies are there working in a similar space to you?
So in let's call it supersonic aircraft. So besides us, you have Boom Supersonic. So they're building a Mach 2.2 commercial aircraft. It'll carry 45, 55 people or so. You have Arion Supersonic. They're working on a 11 or 13 passenger business jet that'll fly Mach 1.4, 1.6. There's another company called Spike, also working on a Mach 1.6 or 1.8 business jet. And then you have the rocket folks. So Elon has talked a lot about using Big Falcon rocket for moving people from one place to another. I think I think it's an interesting way of doing things for really, really long range missions, like, halfway across the world. I think for crossing oceans, I think airplanes are still going to be the more efficient choice.
And as landing is center core,
it's still tough.
It's just going to be a very difficult thing to pull off with the kind of safety you need for commercial air travel.
We have the same things to prove, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody has flown a Mach 5 aircraft reusably before, so we have to do the same thing and prove that it can be done
How
reliably.
many people are going to be on your plane?
Our cabin will carry about 20 people, so it's
Is that? Oh, well, that's a good size business jet.
Yep, good sized business jet, and at Mach 5, it's actually a pretty viable commercial airliner as well.
All right, and that gets you across the Atlantic in
90 minutes.
90 minutes.
Yep.
Wheels up to wheels down.
Yep.
To touchdown. That's absolutely fascinating. Well, thank you, AJ, and thank you all for listening to Travel Safely, brought to you by Applied Information, the show about transportation technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Today we've been talking about the future of flight and how Georgia is playing a key role. Our guest has been AJ Piplica, co-founder and CEO of Hermeus, a company developing a Mach 5 business class aircraft for commercial use. So AJ, thanks for visiting with us and all you do in helping Georgia and make the world a better place.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Until next time, this is Brian Mulligan signing off from Business Radio X, and travel safely.